My name's Lucy MacLeod. I'm an illustrator. However, I call myself all sorts of things. To me, it doesn't really matter, but I'm an illustrator. This is some of my work. My clients include, like The Guardian, obviously, Times, Independent, women's magazines, big companies, kind of Amazon and Royal Mail, British Airways, all sorts. I've done just random stuff for years. But if you were to look at my Instagram or if you were to look at my website, you'd see probably more stuff like this. Is kind of more my personal work. I call myself, I would say, like a fashion artist in a sense, in a way, kind of a life drawing. But it's more in a commercial setting. So I've not purposefully done this. It's just something that's happened. My background was fine art. I went to Edinburgh College of Art and I studied painting. My dad was an architect, my mum was a painter. So this kind of stuff was in my house with kind of like really like designed furniture, and it was all very uncomfortable. But anyway, so it kind of gave me a weird mixture of influences from David Hockney's been like a huge influence, but I find it really hard to say why. But I think when I look at his work, I think he pays just as much attention to the objects as the people, and he's fascinated by like just that portrait of an umbrella. I think it's like stunning. And I don't draw umbrellas, so I've not been influenced in that way, but I think the fact that the background is kind of abstracted sometimes, his influence is clearly Picasso massively. And so it kind of led me on to look at Picasso and the way that he looked at boundaries. And hopefully you'll see a slide and it will kind of make sense about what I'm talking about here. But people like this, the fine artists, I see design in their work, and I think it's influenced me as an illustrator, as a designer of illustrations, and as an artist. I feel like there's two strands to kind of my journey. So this is some of my work that I feel is kind of influenced by my background in fine art, and the kind of the things that I kind of just grew up looking at. The idea of kind of abstracting background symbolism, and somehow that interplay between the background and those symbols, and the figure, I just love that. It just makes me excited. Not a sexual. Sorry, children. Alexander Calder, I love him. He's one of the people, I think, that when I don't know what the hell I'm doing, I look at his work and it kind of just does something to me. I think the fact that he did set designs, he was an illustrator, he was a sculptor. I love that he blurred those lines. And there's something about seeing a figure next to one of his works. Again, it makes me think of Picasso. It makes me think of Hockney. It's the way that people kind of in a designed environment, I want to draw that. It just makes me want to draw. But I want to kind of draw both of those things. So I'm just basically really greedy and selfish. I want to draw. But I love this photo and the shapes when he created jewelry design, which he's quite well known for as well. There's something about the shapes of that, again, just kind of seeing jewelry on somebody, the form of the person against the form of the designed object really excites me. So when I do kind of personal work, often that's the kind of place I go to. I abstract shapes and I make them kind of play with the figure. So there's that combination of the fine art approach in rendering the figure and the kind of graphic design approach when rendering kind of the environment around that figure. I would say that's what I do. I don't know if there's a job title that goes with that, but I certainly use it commercially. So Egon Schiele as well was like my kind of first crush. So I'm not really talking about myself, I just realised I'm just talking about people I like. But anyway, I'm boring. I'll talk about myself eventually. So again, there's something about just the graphic kind of shapes within the garments as well. I think that kind of led me to fashion in a way. When I had my children, I came back from having my children, kind of reinvented myself. I was previously an editorial illustrator, and when I came back from having children, it made me almost go back to my roots as a fine artist and think again about the body. And I realised that I wanted to be more of a fashion illustrator, and kind of just decided just to go for it and see what happened. And I started looking again at Egon Schiele, and that was one of the first kind of examples of graphics next to a body that I remember seeing, and I remember feeling really excited by that. And also another strand of what I do as an illustrator is I teach as well. So I teach fashion designers often, fashion design students, how to put together a portfolio. And I find that my design background, my illustration background, and things like looking at that Egon Schiele graphic, it somehow has informed how I teach as well. So all those kind of strands all come together. So it's very hard to think of myself as a fine artist, an illustrator, a designer, a teacher. I think I'm just all of them. But I know my limitations. This is to symbolise someone that needs help. Everybody needs help. That's me having a nervous breakdown, and that's terrible graphics. Sorry, and I've gone away from the microphone. I am really bad at graphics. I'm just terrible at it. So I definitely know my limitations. And as an illustrator, and to be successful in illustration, you need to know how to present yourself. And you could have beautiful visuals and be an amazing drawer, and if your website's shit, you won't get any work. So I always call upon proper designers, I call them, for my presentation. And I'm very lucky, my partner has a graphics design background. So he put together my website. So I absolutely cannot take credit if you go and check out my website, lucymacleod.co.uk. That is not my work. I did not put that website together. So I think this exhibition has really made me think about what design is, and it's actually given me a renewed sense of awe for proper design, because I know I'm not a designer. I think I'm a designer when someone gives me money to create an illustration and they give me constraints and they say, I want something at this resolution, this size, and I want it on Wednesday. I'm a designer for the 2 days or whatever that it takes me, and then I go back to being a fashion artist again. I think it's important to make a distinction you have to make a distinction yourself in your career when you're selling your work and when you're showing your work to people. You're forced as well, especially if you want funding for your work. A very good example of the pickle that I often find myself in is if I apply for funding as an artist, I get refused because I'm a designer, apparently. This is an example of a work that I was refused funding for. If I apply as a designer, I'm refused because I'm an artist. So you get stuck in this kind of weird sandwich between the two worlds. And actually, in my mind, I have more difficulty distinguishing, am I an artist or am I a commercial artist? That seems more relevant to me. I never really think of great, good idea. But the last slide that I didn't talk about was places like Recoat, and I think that's the future for people who kind of straddle all these kind of weird worlds and they find it hard to categorize themselves. It's very difficult to sell your work and to find an audience. And places like Recoat are the future, and there's more and more of them, thankfully. So well done. That's it.